Good morning, big dogs. Welcome back into the BDGE Dynasty channel. My name's Adam. If you're new to the channel, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content that we're going to bring to you here every single week on the game of Dynasty. And right now, a lot of the information is really starting to heat up. As we know, the 2025 draft is in the books. It was a crazy and chaotic draft. Let's just call it what it is. There was so many different things. No matter what you thought was going to happen from the top in the first round all the way through the Shedeur Sanders slide, so many different things. But what I want to get into today actually right now is when this information at this point becomes such a peak thing, right? Draft picks, the players in which you may want to target. I think one of the biggest things that I like to do at this time is try to go against the grain, not to just be contrarian, but more so because I think a lot of the veterans overall can be overlooked during this really crazy hype and euphoria for the players that just got drafted, potentially in a great landing spot with draft capital. So let's go ahead and talk about what I think are the three biggest winners in this NFL draft that are veterans that at this time I think it's really important to go try to see if you can get before the value starts to creep and closer as we get to the regular season. The first two players on this list going to be from the Chicago Bears. And let's talk about the Chicago Bears situation leading up to and after the draft. Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson went up at the podium after day 3 to kind of talk through a lot of their entire draft process and why they went the direction they did all the way from round 1 through round 7. And one of the things we know with Ben Johnson coming over, this was pretty much the hottest name, I would say, as far as the offensive side of the ball goes in the free agency, so to speak, for coaching for the last several years. Him going to Chicago, that definitely is going to be a massive upgrade over what Shane Waldron was as a play caller last year. And while on the surface it made a lot of sense, and all the mocks really had the Bears going out and hand selecting their running back of choice to be really their probably bell cow type of a running back for the next several years on the rookie contract under Ben Johnson in this new offensive situation with Caleb Williams at the helm. The reality, though, they talked about Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson really trusting their board and leaning on that and letting the picks fall to them, essentially not going out and reaching for any specific positions. So they don't take a running back almost in the entire draft. They end up at the very end taking Kyle Monaghanai out of Rutgers, who I think is a solid running back. But the truth is that level of draft capital investment, plus it just being Kyle Monaghanai, there is nobody coming into this situation here in Chicago to which DeAndre Swift is not going to likely be the primary ball carrier and potential 3-down workhorse for this Chicago Bears offense coming up in 2025. The Chicago Bears basically revamped, though, this entire offensive line in the offseason, right? So you have Joe Dahlman, they brought in free agency. He was the top paid center and best get on the market as far as centers go. They went out to the Kansas City Chiefs. They traded for Joe Thuney. He is getting older, but at 32 years old, he is stability at the guard position. Basically, he's almost never missing time. And not just that, he's still regarded at the moment as one of the best guards in football. They only had to trade a 4th-round pick away for Joe Thuney, and they brought him in now to solidify that position. Also on the other end now, Jonah Jackson, which they traded a 6th-round pick for. That's the interior of their offensive line, and they addressed, again, the offensive tackle situation that they needed some help on. That's going to be their right tackle. Now their offensive line, at this point, is going to be completely revamped. Last year, when you take a look at DeAndre Swift, on the surface, you may not really like what took place, certainly with the yards per attempt. This is his lowest yards per carry, under 4, 3.8, but a lot of what we know with the yards per carry truly is you're only going to be able to create so much for yourself, and a lot of it's going to come down to what the offensive line is doing for you, right? And also with them addressing the tight end position in Colston Loveland, as well as Luther Burden in the early part of the 2nd round, those being their first 2 picks, that now really is going to probably spread out defenses and make them really have to honor a lot of what they think are talented receiving positions for this team. Colston Loveland, top 10 draft capital. Luther Burden inside the top 40. You have DJ Moore, still one of their highest paid receivers in the NFL. And then you also are taking a look at Rome Odunze, who was last year a top 10 pick. That's the offensive situation behind a good offensive line that now DeAndre Swift is going to be walking into this same situation as last year, except totally different level of upside this offense carries. Where you take a look last year, DeAndre Swift, that was the most carries that he's ever seen in his career. And one of the other things was he stayed healthy last year, played all 17 games. You take a look at the year prior where he played in Philadelphia behind a good offensive line. That was what was considered a career year for DeAndre Swift. And at this point, while the running back position is not something we really value that much, especially as we get down the line of the player's talent overall, what we think of them, and when we take a look at their age, certainly DeAndre Swift is not probably someone that you should be considering for a long-term investment. I get all that. on his contract right now, this is the last year that he's really guaranteed most of it. Chicago can get out of this contract going into next season if they want to, and if he doesn't have a great season as far as what he does in production. However, the running back position at this point where DeAndre Swift is valued, I really only value it in a window of 1 to 2 years anyway. And not just that, DeAndre Swift at this point, if I'm valuing it in a 1 or 2 year window, I think he's in the prime of his career and has a very good chance at this point to possibly get as many touchdowns as he's ever had. Caleb Williams is not Jalen Hurts from Philadelphia, right? Jalen Hurts in the tush push definitely took away the touchdown upside for DeAndre Swift. And last year, you take a look at the way they used DeAndre Swift. He only had 6 goal line carries. Roschon Johnson a lot of times might come in and actually take some of the goal line carries from DeAndre Swift. I don't necessarily know how that's going to work out as far as what that looks like, but I think there's just as good of a chance that DeAndre Swift, with Ben Johnson's familiarity, actually does get a little bit more goal line carries. And the truth is, DeAndre Swift can have his best season, I think, as far as the rushing department overall efficiency and touchdown upside, not to mention that he's always been and is known for his receiving prowess. DeAndre Swift, I think right now, is someone that I have inside of my top 20 to 25 running backs pretty easily at this point. Right now, you can go out and try to, I think, get DeAndre Swift from a lot of different people for far less than that. And the reality is you're not going to have to spend probably a first-round pick to get DeAndre Swift on your team. This is someone I think that is the biggest winner as far as free agency goes, that's completely under the radar and I think going to be a low-cost investment for your dynasty teams that can actually help you in a big way as far as contending. And the second person on this list, again, sticking with the Chicago Bears here, I don't think anybody saw Caleb Williams coming out of the NFL draft being this big of a winner because nobody thought that the Chicago Bears, as they talked about, were going to just stick to their board and draft best position available regardless. And if that was the case, it clearly showed with their draft pick of Colston Loveland at 10 as well as Luther Burden at 37. I don't think once they moved on from Keenan Allen, right, this offseason, it was pretty clear that they weren't going to bring him back based on what happened last year and him being such an old receiver at this point. But nobody, I don't think, saw them taking pass-catching weapons in their first 2 picks inside of the top 40 after the level of investment that they made in Rome Odunze, plus the fact that they have DJ Moore on a big contract. So to this point, Caleb Williams, with those 2 things being the case, has to be the biggest winner, especially with also in the second round, them addressing, again, as I said, the offensive tackle position, the one other potential weak spot they had on this offensive line. They have a good offensive line that's going to be able to give Caleb Williams a lot more time in the pocket. You have a much better play caller than Shane Waldron now in Ben Johnson, and you have truly talented receivers all over the field for this team. So I think this one is a lot more obvious. Here's the one thing I will consider and want you to consider with Caleb Williams as well. I think the upside now and what his situation and expectations are going into the year clearly makes him the biggest winner and probably a buy, so to speak, in Dynasty. The reality is, though, this is already a player that last year was drafted 101 in many leagues, right? 102 maybe behind Marvin Harrison Jr. So someone right now has invested a lot into this player, and without giving up a haul, you really may not be able to go out and buy Caleb Williams on the low, so to speak. The other thing to keep in mind with Caleb Williams on the flip side of this, I think, is that the expectations now are going to be extremely clear and obvious. I think everybody is expecting him to kind of have a big, huge bounce back and kind of a career year, obviously, with all the situation change at this time. One thing to keep in mind, though, right, if this doesn't really go as well, right, if this kind of has some issues this year where there's still growing pains with Caleb Williams, or he actually doesn't look good throughout a majority of the time, I don't think he's going to have this value retention that we've seen in some of the other quarterbacks out there, like Trevor Lawrence, who it took a long time for him to get to this point of quarterback 19. I think you might see, if Caleb Williams really, really struggles again, his value actually go down quicker than we would expect from a top number 1 overall pick selection like him. The talent and the situation he has right now, I think, might change a little of the value insulation there. So that's one thing to consider on the risk side. And I say all that to really highlight this type of an investment is not going to be for the faint of heart, right? You're not going to be trading for Caleb Williams without still sending away probably a pretty significant haul. And if you're not believing in the situation, I'm kind of letting you know I don't think, and I would acknowledge that there's not as much value insulation in him as typically a young rookie quarterback. However, on the flip side, right, if you are going to invest in him, if he takes a big step forward this year with all the weapons they have around him, with the play calling situation, with this coaching upgrade, this is a guy, again, that was drafted ahead of Jaden Daniels in most leagues, ahead of guys like Malik Neighbors. So at this point, if he starts to have a really big second season, his value is going to probably put him into the range of close to the elite quarterbacks, getting him close to Joe Burrow. So as far as that really high upside, I do think that Caleb Williams definitely possesses that. So even if you were to invest right now at what feels like a pretty high cost, I think there's a lot of room for improvement as well if we do see Caleb Williams take a step forward. I think right now, if you believe in the talent, there is no reason to believe this situation is not going to put him in the best possible position to see that upside take off and go to the moon. Caleb Johnson, pretty easily for me, the second person on this list. And let's get into number 3 here. I do have an honorable mention to get to as well, but in third player on this list for me is going to be Chase Brown. Chase Brown, leading up to the NFL draft, and honestly a lot of this offseason, I was very hesitant to invest in Chase Brown. And for the process of it, I think it makes a ton of sense, and where I was staying away from Chase Brown. This is a guy that did not really earn a heavy percentage of snaps, and towards the end of the season, when that snap share went up significantly, we saw how much of a league winner he was. So don't get me wrong, we all know that he had the league winning upside he did in the second part of last year. However, we didn't really have any idea what the Bengals were going to do, and them bringing in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, signing them at the same time, retaining them on their offense, is going to keep Joe Burrow in this offense very likely to be humming when they're all healthy and playing well together. Then you're looking at this running back class being so deep. To me, that was the biggest red flag or caution. Don't necessarily buy at the peak price of Chase Brown being in the range of a top 12 running back in Dynasty right now, coming off of this great heater that he finished of the season. However, them getting through the majority of the draft without addressing the running back. Now, the Bengals did address the running back position in round 6, and I do like Taj Brooks coming out of Texas Tech. But what that level of investment, I don't think Taj Brooks profiles as someone that should be concerning for Chase Brown as far as really limiting his overall ability. Now, it may limit his ceiling as far as him getting maybe not quite that crazy 80% plus range of snaps that we saw him towards the second half of the year, but that probably already was a unrealistic outcome for him to continue to get that snap share without anyone else coming into this situation, right? You take a look at last year, then bringing in a Zach Moss type. I think that Zach Moss and Taj Brooks probably are going to profile as far as the same level of type of run. And honorable mention for me has got to be Drake May. Now, they didn't take a wide receiver until round 3, but let's talk about their draft overall. At 4, they take Will Campbell. Getting a huge left tackle like Will Campbell, I think massive, massive pick for this team. Drake May last year, one of the biggest problems was, even though he showed a lot of flash and promise, there was times he was getting absolutely crushed. And that is something you do not want to see as far as obviously injuries go, but that overall can eventually kind of start to deteriorate a quarterback's confidence, right, as they're getting hit over and over and over. Will Campbell, huge get for them at the 4th overall pick. You look at their 2nd round pick, Travion Henderson. This is a guy that is actually very good as far as pass protection goes if you decide to leave him in there, and he has all the skills and tools to be a 3-down back in the NFL as well. This isn't a Travion Henderson piece, but the thing about him being there is also a very nice dump off for you to really trust in this scenario where you don't have a lot moving on downfield. I think Travion Henderson is going to be someone that he can always use kind of as a security blanket, and it's going to be someone that you can leave in on pass protection to also help Drake May's confidence. And finally, they do address the wide receiver position. Kyle Williams in round 3, early part of round 3, and I think this is a prospect that I've been very high on in the offseason process leading up to the draft. I like Kyle Williams quite a bit. I love the landing spot, and you may say that overall you don't think he's, the investment that you'd like to see at the wide receiver position, and you may not really believe in his prospect profile. I really like what I've seen from Kyle Williams on film. I think he has a lot of the traits to potentially even be a number 1 in this offense. He's someone I'm targeting in the 2nd round, but this is definitely a big get for Drake May, in my opinion. I think overall these 3 picks at the top absolutely have got to make him a winner in this draft. And one thing to note, Steve Smith actually compared Kyle Williams to himself when talking about player comps. That to me is pretty rare and pretty cool to see. But that's all I got for today's video. Let me know overall down in the comments what you think of these 3 players and their situations going into 2025. And let me know what other type of videos you want to see from me in the post-draft process here, now that we have seen the NFL Draft 2025 in the books. I'll see you back here, same time, same place, next week with more Dynasty content. I'm out of here. Peace.